Good morning, folks. I'm Lieutenant Governor Kim Driscoll, and on behalf of the Governor's Council, it's my honor to welcome you to this hearing on the nomination of Elizabet N. Dewar to the position of Associate Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the history that informs our task today. The Supreme Judicial Court is the oldest continuously functioning appellate court in the United States, operating under our state constitution, which is the oldest continuously functioning written constitution anywhere in the entire world. It's over 3 centuries of existence. In its over 3 centuries of existence, the Supreme Judicial Court has stewarded our independent judiciary, adjudicated some of our country's most important cases, and safeguarded our essential constitutional rights as Massachusetts residents. There have been approximately 150 justices in the court's history. Only 11 of them have been women. The court operated for 285 years, from 1692 until 1977, before seeing its first woman justice, Ruth Abrams, who was appointed to the court by Governor Dukakis in 1977. Justice Abrams served alone as the first and only woman for nearly 20 years, and her service inspired a whole generation of lawyers, including myself. Margaret Marshall eventually joined Justice Abrams and went on to become the court's first woman Chief Justice in 1999. Barbara Lenk was the first openly LGBTQ woman on the court in 2011 and was later followed by the second, Elizabeth Cipher, whose distinguished service on the bench and career-long commitment to public service we also pay tribute to today. In 2013, Geraldine Hines became the first African-American woman to serve, and in 2020, just 3 years ago, Delilah Wentlet became the first Latina on the court, and Chief Justice Budd was appointed as the first African-American woman to be Chief Justice. It's a privilege to be able to mark these transformational accomplishments and to play a part in the work of selecting judges who will reflect the rich talents of the people of Massachusetts in all their variation and diversity. I am honored to introduce members of the Governor's Council who, among other duties, have the responsibility of improving judicial appointments consistent with the duty and responsibility conferred to them through the Massachusetts Constitution. I will call them in the order that we would be sitting in if we were in the Governor's Council Assembly area. That would be Councilor Eileen Duff from District 5, Councilor Terrence Kennedy, District 6, who joins us via Zoom.
Good morning. My
Good morning.
apologies for being on Zoom. I tested positive for COVID last night. So
hope you're feeling well, Councilor, and glad you're on Zoom. Councilor Paul DiPaolo from District 7, Councilor Tara Jacobs from District 8, Councilor Joe Ferreira from District 1, Councilor Marilyn Petito Devaney from District 3, and finally, Councilor Christopher Iannella, who is from the 4th District, the district of our nominee. Councilor Iannella has graciously agreed to assist me in chairing this hearing, my first, and will assist by helping keeping time during this hearing, managing other orders of business, and kicking me below the desk if I'm doing anything wrong.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning.
To begin the hearing, I will now read the Governor's letter of nomination. One moment as I gather that. Stated December 8th, 2023, to the Executive Council in the Council Chamber. Dear Councilors, I am pleased to nominate Elizabet N. Dewar to the position of Associate Justice of the Supreme Judicial Court. I submit this nomination for the advice and consent of the Executive Council pursuant to Part 2, Chapter 2 of the Constitution of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm enclosing the nominee's resume for your convenience. Sincerely, Maura T. Healey. It is now my privilege and honor to introduce Governor Healey and ask her to recognize and introduce our nominee.
Thank you so much, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning to you and to members of the Governor's Council. It's an honor to be here today as we introduce Bessie Dewar as our nominee to the Supreme Judicial Court. This is an important day. It's an important day for our administration. Choosing an Associate Justice for the Supreme Judicial Court is one of the weightiest tasks entrusted to us together as Governor, as Lieutenant Governor, and as Governor's Council. In approaching my part of the task, I'm grateful to have had the assistance of an outstanding Supreme Judicial Court nominating commission. They worked hard, and you have worked hard in a short amount of time so that we can be ready when Justice Cipher retires at the beginning of January after a distinguished career on the bench. I appreciate your partnership and all that you have done in this instance and in every instance to ensure that our judiciary remains strong now and going forward. It is my honor to recommend today State Solicitor Bessie Dewar as this administration's first nominee to serve as an Associate Justice on the Supreme Judicial Court. I've had the privilege to work closely with her in the trenches, so to speak, at the Attorney General's office while I was honored as Attorney General of Massachusetts. I can tell you from professional and personal experience what a tremendous asset this nominee will be to our court. It would be easy to underestimate this nominee. Bessie Dewar is a lovely person. She is caring, kind, empathetic, demonstrates tremendous compassion. She's a loving mother to her children and a devoted wife to her husband. She could accurately be described as soft-spoken, engaging, welcoming, and polite. She has a youthful and contagious energy. She's excellent at building consensus. I don't think I would be exaggerating if I said that everyone she has ever worked with absolutely respects her and loves her. In addition, and as importantly, Bessie brings with her a fierce intelligence, a steadfast and unwavering dedication to justice in its most broad and inclusive form, and a deep and nuanced understanding of the law and of the court at its work. All of that has come through real experience in the courtroom, in appearance after appearance, with wisdom demonstrated far beyond her years. It is Bessie Dewar's insightful analytical talent and her extensive experience as a trial and appellate advocate that led me to choose her to be our state's second ever state solicitor. That was back in 2016, following the departure of then state solicitor Peter Sachs to the appeals court. After clerking for such luminaries as U.S. Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer, the Honorable William Fletcher of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and the Honorable Louis Pollock of the United States District Court of Pennsylvania, Bessie distinguished herself as a pillar of the appellate bar in Massachusetts. As this Commonwealth's second state solicitor, Bessie was a trusted counselor, advising me and our team on the most complicated legal issues that faced our office. She supervised all of our office's critical appellate work, covering a range of all legal questions that affect our state and overseeing the office's appellate briefing in both civil and criminal cases. She handled and argued some of the most complex and most important cases in our state's history. And she has coordinated with lawyers and community stakeholders across the country on issues of local and national importance. I can say that because I was there serving with her while she was an assistant attorney general, as was I. And later, when I was attorney general, Bessie was a go-to person sought after not only by lawyers here in Massachusetts, but of state solicitors' offices across this country, both Republican and Democrat. She's that good, that trusted, and has that much integrity. Through all of this, I have seen how thoughtfully and compassionately she approaches her work. Like so many of her colleagues, I know that she is a brilliant attorney, a clear communicator, someone who has dedicated her career to public service and access to justice. Bessie could have worked anywhere in the country, And I am grateful that she decided to lend her experience and her talent in furtherance of the public interest. But what truly distinguishes Bessie Dewar as an attorney and a colleague, and importantly for your consideration, is how she stays with it and perseveres. Unfazed by the thorniest, the most complicated, the most emotional, or the most seemingly intractable legal issues, which are the very things that justices of our Supreme Judicial Court have to contend with day to day in their work. Bessie is unfazed. And importantly, she's really adept at bringing people together, at building consensus with intellectual rigor in situations where there otherwise might be dissent or discord. Her commitment to forging agreement when she confronts hard questions and to building bridges when arguments get passionate is what makes Bessie the exemplary attorney that she is. And it is this trait that I know will make her an excellent jurist and a considerable asset to the Supreme Judicial Court and to the people of Massachusetts. For these reasons, I've chosen to nominate Bessie Dewar as an Associate Justice to the Supreme Judicial Court. She is a true student of the court and understands deeply its role and its importance. I am confident that she is the right person to fill this role at this critical moment. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. And with that, I will leave you to enjoy what I'm absolutely sure will be a thoughtful conversation with the nominee, Bessie Dewar, and remarks from the witnesses. Thank you again for what you do.
Thank you, Governor. Good morning, Attorney Dewar. I understand you have some invited guests you brought, some family and friends. If you'd like to take a moment to introduce them, that would be lovely. Can you just maybe see if your mic is on? One more time. There you go.
Is that on?
Perfect.
Excellent. Good morning again. With me here today are my husband, Alex Welsh, and our daughters, Violet and Sylvia, and my mother, Allison Richard. And also sitting with my daughters is the daughter of one of my witnesses, Alma. I'm so grateful to have them all with me today.
Thank you so much. We're also especially honored to have several distinguished guests, including Attorney General Campbell joining us this morning. Thank you all for being here. And girls, we know if you need a note for school, we can provide that as well. Attorney Dewar has submitted a witness list of 3 people who will be speaking on her behalf to the Governor's Council, Ms. Jen Teixeira, Mr. Douglas Hallward Dreemeyer, and Mr. Justin Steele. For those who are not on the list and wish to speak, we'll certainly provide an opportunity for anyone to be heard on this nomination. There should be index cards on the front table for anybody who is interested in offering some additional comments. If you can print your name and address on the index card, indicate whether you're speaking in favor of the nomination or in opposition, and you can take the completed index cards up to the front so we can make sure we have them. We'd like to ask all witnesses who are speaking to try and keep their remarks to 5 minutes. Counselor Iannella will be joining and helping with housekeeping to try and make sure we maintain that time period to ensure that we have an opportunity for everyone to offer any comments that they may have. And I think at this point, we also want to make sure folks know we do have 2 legal pads. If you'd like to be recorded in support or opposition of the nominee, you may do so. One legal pad will be for supporters, one for those in opposition. You can put your name and address and indicate where you stand. At this point, I would ask the nominee to identify the order of the witnesses and who you may be calling first.
Good morning. I would like to call the witnesses, if I may, in chronological order of my life. So the first witness would be Justin Steele, whom I've known for 25 years, and followed by Doug Hallward Dreemeyer, and followed by my AGO colleague, Jen Teixeira.
Perfect. If you'd like to come forward, that would be lovely.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. I've known Bessie for 25 years since we were both in college, and it is an honor to speak on her behalf. We met when we were both volunteering in the evenings teaching at the Suffolk County House of Correction. We became friends as we reflected on that experience, spending our evenings wrestling with how we as a society should respond to addiction and to violence. Bessie is a person who cares about everybody from all walks of life, and that's one of the reasons we have stayed friends all these years. Teaching at South Bay was an experience that had a tremendous impact on both of us then and continues to influence us now. Teaching there led me into a career working with community-based organizations and then as an educator, teaching at the City School in Boston, working on youth development at the Food Project, and eventually leading me to MIT, where I teach about affordable housing policy and environmental justice. For Bessie, seeing how law directly impacted the lives of our students in South Bay led her to law school and the practice of law. She could have spent her whole career in highly paid work, removed from the realities of everyday life. Instead, she worked at the Public Interest Law Center in Philadelphia and has spent the past 8 years representing the interests of the residents of our Commonwealth in the Attorney General's office. What stood out to me about Bessie 25 years ago continues to impress me today. Bessie is incredibly brilliant and hardworking, but more importantly, deeply empathetic, profoundly humble, and remarkably generous. 25 years ago, Bessie was able to see how, despite the gulf society erects between those inside and outside prison, our fates as a society are intertwined. That sense of our interconnectedness and shared fate has only grown. For example, I've been a volunteer EMT for years and I'm taking a leave from academia to become a paramedic this year. No one is more interested or supportive of this work than Bessie, who asks insightful questions about how the experiences of patients and the patients at St. Elizabeth's Hospital in Brighton, where I'm currently doing my clinical rotations, illuminate their legal needs and the social determinants of health. Bessie has always been a generous friend and mentor. I remember visiting Bessie in Washington while she was clerking, and she took the time to take me out to dinner at a small bar to share advice with me about starting my career working on civil rights issues. Since I moved back to Boston in 2015, our families have spent lots of time together, and I'm amazed at how Bessie is able to simultaneously work so hard at her job and still make so much time for her family, her friends, and for community engagement. Bessie inspired my kids to join hers at neighborhood running events. Bessie's out in front of Back Bay Station selling Girl Scout cookies with her daughters. And Bessie is active in her daughter's school, the Curley School in Jamaica Plain. Bessie is deeply aware of the tremendous responsibility of her role representing the residents of the Commonwealth as Solicitor General. But I cannot think of anyone who could approach that role with as much humility as Bessie does. She is just so down to earth. When the announcement of Bessie's nomination appeared in the Globe, my wife got a text from a friend about the article saying, "I almost didn't recognize her. I've only met her wearing overalls and with her bike." I know that if Bessie were an Associate Justice, she would bring her deep humility and profound respect for others to that role. Particularly important in these polarized times, Bessie is someone who has always approached problems with an open mind and demonstrated respect for those whose opinions she disagrees with. Bessie never takes others for granted. I have no doubt that her interactions with counsel and parties before the court, with colleagues, clerks, staff, and with the public will demonstrate the highest ethical standards and her deep respect for all she crosses paths with. Bessie's dedication to public service, her empathy, her genuine humility, and her hard work and attention to detail, I know would inspire all of those connected to the court. Bessie is universally admired and respected by those who know her. I cannot imagine anyone I would be more confident in to serve the Commonwealth with integrity, dedication, and care as an Associate Justice than Bessie Dewar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. I will now ask if any of our counselors have questions for this witness. Counselor Duff, Counselor DiPaolo. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Our next witness will be Mr. Douglas Hallward Dreemeyer. Am I saying that right? I want to make sure I give justice to it.
You are.
All right.
I'm impressed because it is a mouthful, to say the least. Thank you very much, honorable members of the Governor's Council. I am very pleased today to speak in favor of the nomination of Bessie Dewar to serve as Associate Justice on the Supreme Judicial Court. I've known Bessie both professionally and as a friend for the past 13 years. Bessie was the first associate that I hired after leaving the United States Solicitor General's office, as we started out the process of building a private practice focused on appellate litigation. I still recall sitting in a conference room with Bessie and being struck not only with how smart she is, but how nice she was. What I was looking for mostly was someone who could be a partner in this project of starting a new practice. And that is what I found most definitely in Bessie. There are many qualities that I love about Bessie, but I wanted to highlight three that I think will serve her and the Commonwealth particularly well if she is confirmed as a justice. The first is her curiosity. One of the hallmarks of an appellate practice and of serving on an appellate court is the range of matters that you have to deal with. That is especially true of a Supreme Court justice who must deal with issues crossing all subject matters and all procedural postures. As the highest court in the Commonwealth, the SJC must decide cases not only on the basis of the facts of the individual case, but with an eye toward all of its implications for all of the future cases for which it will serve as precedent. A strong justice, like a strong appellate lawyer, needs the ability to quickly pick up a new subject matter, to identify the key issues, and to ask the tough questions. Bessie exemplified that kind of broad interest and curiosity when we worked together on matters that involve contract law, deal litigation, personal injury, administrative litigation, and the First Amendment. And I can only imagine the questions that she would ask counsel if she were confirmed to serve on the bench. It's with some trepidation that I imagine being faced with those questions. The second trait that I want to highlight is her colleagueship. As I noted at the outset, Bessie was more than simply an associate in the appellate practice. She helped to get it off the ground. Doing that is hard work, and it really requires being there for one another, to bounce questions and ideas off of each other, to think about how we would approach tough issues. She also had a big role in mentoring the more junior associates who joined our team. And one thing that I have been struck with in the days since her nomination is the number of people who were then just new associates starting out their practice who have come up to me to say how they remember working with Bessie and the mentorship that she showed them, the time that she took with them to explain why she had made certain edits. She had a nickname in the firm. She was called Chainsaw Dewar because of her ability to take a brief that might say be twice as long as it was supposed to be and get it down to size, always focusing in the process and making it better because it was focused on the things that really mattered. I am sure that she would be a wonderful colleague to her fellow justices as they work through knotty problems. And I know she would be an incredible mentor to her law clerks. I only regret that I am probably too senior to apply. And finally, her compassion. Bessie has never treated the law merely as an academic exercise. She cares very much about the practical implications on the lives of real people. I witnessed that firsthand when I saw her deal with the physicians who we represented in challenging a Florida statute that restricted their ability to speak with patients about the dangers of guns in the home. It was a very important legal issue that we were raising, but Bessie knew that it was also deeply personal for them. They were actually taking a step of great courage to step up and be willing to be identified as the plaintiffs in this lawsuit. And it was the care and compassion that I observed Bessie deal with these plaintiffs, understanding what they were going through personally that made me appreciate how she identifies with other people. I saw it also in her work across many other pro bono matters for an LGBTQ asylum applicant fleeing persecution, a student in Philadelphia who had been denied a quality education. I would never suggest nor expect that Bessie would allow her personal views to influence the outcomes of individual cases. But I believe that that quality of compassion and understanding the impact of cases on individuals is what makes one a truly great justice. And I know that Bessie would do that. The Commonwealth would be well served if Bessie is confirmed to serve on the Supreme Judicial Court. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallward-Driemeier. Are there any questions from members of the Governor's Council? Councillor Devaney.
Thank you. Your testimony.
Councillor Devaney, would you just mind hitting your microphone? There you go.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Your testimony was very meaningful. Can you tell us one case that you were so impressed with this nominee?
Well, the one that we worked on longest was the one I mentioned, which was challenging the Florida statute. It was difficult procedurally, it was difficult substantively, and then it was difficult because of the tension that it created and the vulnerability that our plaintiffs felt in bringing that. And Bessie was able to address all of those things, right? I mean, the procedural complexity in bringing a complaint and a preliminary injunction motion, and do you sue the governor, do you not sue the governor, all of those things, Bessie had sort of all of those issues in mind. And it was the way she worked with our clients. It was the way, again, she was working with the junior associates and bringing them along and editing, and then helping think through some very difficult constitutional principles were just all very impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I really, you have a good witness. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Devaney. Councillor Ferreira?
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony today. We all know that she's very young for this job. That's something that I'm sure someone's going to talk about, and that she's never been a judge before. So my question to you is, have you seen any evidence of her ability to stand up to people? You know, at the SJC, there's people that have been judges for 25 years. And I've heard, rumblings about some of the conversations that happen when they're forming these decisions. Is Betsy going to be able to stand up to people in that room and say her own, her own opinion of what she brings into the room and write a dissent when necessary?
I would say that my experience with Bessie was that she was never cowed from standing up. I was 10 years her senior. I was the partner. She was a new associate. And I think there are many associates who make the mistake in that situation of feeling that they're just a yes person. It's whatever. And I always say to those associates, no. I like to think creatively, but that means you have to be willing to push back when I'm making a mistake. And Bessie was always willing to push back when she thought that the law was something other than I was suggesting it to be. I've also encountered her more recently, since she's been working as the state solicitor, and I've been working in private practice, when we would have occasion to inquire whether the state might have an interest in taking a position in support of our clients in something, and she was never a pushover in that either. And there were certainly instances where the answer was no, that was not in the interest of this estate. Although on other instances, such as when we represented the city of Boston in its litigation at the U.S. Supreme Court about the flags that fly outside of Boston City Hall, the state was there alongside the city of Boston, explaining the importance of a governmental entity being able to control its own speech, or the speech that would be associated with that as a government.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions from members of the Governor's Council? Okay, seeing none. Thank you very much for your testimony. And last but certainly not least, Ms. Jen Teixeira.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Yeah, today. I am the receptionist at the Attorney General's.
Ms. Teixeira, could you push the microphone just a little closer to you? I want to make sure we can all hear what you have to say.
Excuse me, I'm a little nervous. I am the receptionist at the Attorney General, Andrea Campbell's office for 16 plus years. I've known Betsy for 10 years. I am the first point of contact when entering the office. Betsy has always engaged. Good morning, hello, yatehe, a smile or a nod, always an acknowledgement. I find her honest, kind, and respectful. My question, would I find her impartial and fair? Yes, and I would add authentic and amazing. And I think the Commonwealth, the citizens of Massachusetts deserve a Betsy Dewar. Thank you. It's been an honor.
Thank you so much. Are there any questions of this witness by members of the Governor's Council? Councilor Devaney.
Thank you. Don't underestimate your testimony because I value your testimony because you see her every day.
I do.
So you know there's things in her life, that ups and downs, and how she approaches it. In your 10 years, have you ever had someone come in that wasn't that pleasant, that was a little confrontative in how this nominee handled it?
No.
Oh, there hasn't been. Oh, that's wonderful.
It's with Betsy, she's in and she's out. My interaction with the office is a little different. I've never seen her frazzle, but she takes time with everybody, not just myself, with everybody. She takes that time to spend with them and makes them feel special.
Well, your testimony is very important to me because you see the personal side, not the court side. And that's very important to me because I vote for the whole person and I want that person to have compassion and caring. And when I've had judges, I have often looked into people who work in that courthouse, people that clean and all of that. And they have told me how compassionate, how kind this particular person was. So don't underestimate your testimony. It means a lot to me. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Devaney. Any other questions for this witness? Okay, seeing none. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
At this point, if there are any others in attendance who would like to offer additional testimony in favor of the nominee, they may do so now. Okay. Seeing no others coming forward in favor of the nominee, we will close this portion of the hearing and move to any individuals who are here who would like to speak in opposition to the nominee. Seeing no one coming forward, oh, please. Yep. If you could just make sure you state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
My name is Patrick McCabe. I live in Hyde Park. I've been coming to Governor's Council hearings for some time. My major interest with the council hearings is how the court decides custody cases. And my concern today is the history of this nominee on the issue of child custody. I haven't had the opportunity to speak with her. Perhaps you have, but the public doesn't know what her position is on child custody. In particular, in divorces, if both parents are capable and fit parents, can a parent lose custody of their child? Based on the 2018 decision in Miller versus Miller, a parent was found to be capable and fit, nonetheless lost custody of their child. In that decision, no explanation was made for losing custody. If this person is going to be the next nominee, I think it's appropriate for the people to know if she supports joint custody in the cases where both parents are good parents. And if that decision is to the contrary, that an explanation be given. I'm not here to say she's not going to do that. I'm just saying, as part of the public, I don't know from any of her history. She has not been on the bench. We don't have any opinions to read, but I would like to hear her speak to that issue, either on her own or from questions from the panel. And that is the extent of my conversation.
Thank you. Are there any questions from members of the council for this witness? Councilor Devaney.
I just want to say, Lieutenant Governor, that Patrick has been a spokesman for Father Coalition for decades. And I have met with the group, and I know Patrick well. And I know he's very sincere about coming in representing, especially fathers. And I think that that's a very reasonable question, because you and I, Patrick, have seen some things that have gone awry. So of course, I'm for joint custody. How do you think a judge can improve that?
We're talking about on the review. I think there have been improvements in the probate court itself, but on review, they just need to explain why someone's losing custody, or perhaps create a standard. Certainly, in cases coming from juvenile court, the SJC is clearly creating a standard as to how parents lose custody. When it comes from the probate, it's been 45 years since the law changed. They haven't created any standard for a parent to lose custody, even if they're capable and fit. I think that's problematic.
Have you seen, as the spokesman for the Fathers Coalition, have you seen a change for the better in the court, and what further things could they do?
Well, I think there is a bias against joint custody, and you mentioned earlier, it could be said that at one point, certainly fathers tended to lose custody. Now it's both parents.
Okay.
The courts do favor sole custody. Probate may be improving, but they have absolutely no support from the decisions coming from the SJC.
Okay. No, we've been meeting for decades, and I know you have made a difference. And because fathers were not getting a fair deal on this, and we see a little progress. What would you suggest to this nominee in addressing joint custody?
I think if you have to address it. Because if you recall, when I first started coming back here, the complaint was when someone lost custody and appealed it, they wouldn't even discuss it. They would just uphold the decision. If you look at the 2011 Adams case, that was our complaint there. A parent lost custody. They acknowledged he lost custody. That was the point of part of the appeal. They refused to discuss it. You need to write opinions that are addressing the issues before you. The history of shared custody is that the SJC has been ducking that issue for a long time, and they shouldn't, and they should explain why they're doing what they're doing.
Okay, so you believe that the SJC should be more involved in these type of things. How often is this presented to the SJC?
The last major case was 2018.
Wow.
So it could be that probate's doing a better job. There are fewer cases to appeal, and that's great. It could be probate's doing their job. When it comes up to the SJC, my concern is the opinions that they have written are not addressing the issue when they come to them.
Okay, so if there is, let's say, misconduct, what is the responsibility of an SJC member? What action?
Misconduct by a parent?
No, in the probate court, by a judge or a clerk magistrate, or, yeah.
They're reviewing the record. So if the record comes up and explains why someone lost custody, that should be reflected in the SJC opinion. You don't have to tell a whole story, but raise the issues that they could use to say, yes, this was an appropriate decision. However, when the SJC says both parents are capable and fit, they're making it very clear there are no reasons for a parent to lose custody. So even in that case, they have to explain why a parent is losing custody if they're capable and fit.
Right. Well, thank you for your testimony. I always appreciate your expressions, because I know you've been there all these years going to court, and I appreciate it.
Any other questions for this witness, Counselor Iannella?
Very briefly, I'm not sure this has anything to do with the nominee, but just the comment that you made. You used the word joint custody. As you know, I've been a strong advocate for children since I've been on the council, and you've been before us for 20, 25 years. To me, and we're going to get a nominee for the probate court later in the afternoon. To me, it's not joint custody, because to some people, joint custody could mean 99% to 1%. That's technically joint custody. To me, I'm more of an advocate for shared 50-50 custody if the circumstances warrant. Joint, I'm not impressed with the word joint, but I'll get into more of that this afternoon.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Good to see you again.
Wish you the best.
Thank you. Any other witnesses against the nomination? Seeing none, we will close this portion of the hearing. And as we do that, we would now ask Ms. Dewar to present your opening statement.
Good morning, Lieutenant Governor Driscoll, members of the council, Governor Healey. I am, and everyone here today. I am so grateful to be here with you all. So humbled by this nomination and by the extremely kind words of Governor Healey and of my witnesses. I'm also extremely grateful for the work of the council as you perform your important role in our system of checks and balances. And I really have appreciated the time that every single one of you have taken to meet and talk with me over the past 2 weeks. And I really appreciated that. I would not be here today were it not for the support of my family, who, if I may, I'd like to introduce a little bit more. My extraordinary mother and lifelong role model, Allison Richard. My beloved husband, who, Alex Welsh, who ever since the night we met at a dance-off has inspired me to be a better listener and a better person, and without whom it simply would not be possible to think about taking on this tremendous responsibility. And our daughters, Violet and Sylvia, of whom we are so very proud and who bring us so much joy. I am also joined remotely, I believe, through the wonders of YouTube by my beloved sister, Charlotte Dewar, who lives with her family in the UK, her young family, and could not be here today. I feel joined in spirit also by my brilliant and kind father, Robert Dewar, who we lost 10 years ago, and my brother Gavin, who we lost in 1987 before we really got a chance to know the person he would become. Finally, I also feel so grateful to be joined today in different ways by 2 different communities of whom I'm so fortunate to be a part. I grew up in a village of 500 people in Eastern Connecticut, where my mom still lives, the kind of place where everybody knows everybody else and everyone supports each other through everything. And I am so fortunate to live in a similar community here today in Jamaica Plain with Councilor Iannella in a dead-end street where people of all different ages and backgrounds come together on our little circle to talk and play and celebrate each other's holidays and support each other. I so wish that every child could grow up in loving and safe communities like these, and frankly, that every adult could have support like this. It's precisely because of the tremendous privilege and good fortune that I've had in my life that I am here today, and that I've always in my professional life tried to give back as best I could. And my professional life has been filled with so many extraordinary opportunities to do that, that I think have also prepared me for today. I started with working for 3 wonderful, fair-minded, thoughtful judges who I got to see how their different respective courts worked and see how they crafted their opinions. And then I worked at the Public Interest Law Center of Philadelphia, representing individual plaintiffs in their civil rights cases at the trial level. And then I got to work with Doug Hallward-Driemeier, who you heard from earlier, who is not only a renowned and extraordinary appellate advocate himself, but is also an extraordinarily good person who is just as devoted to his family as he is to his work, and set such an extraordinary example to me when I was just starting a family myself. And then working with Justice Sachs, who I believe is here today, when he was the first state solicitor. And I can't begin to say enough about Justice Sachs. He is so brilliant and also so humble and caring and kind, and was such an extraordinary mentor to me in our years working together. And then in the years since, being state solicitor, I've had the extraordinary privilege and responsibility of working to advance the public interest in our appellate courts. A lot of this has, of course, involved civil and criminal appeals, but it's also involved working with different agencies across the Commonwealth and different divisions across our office to figure out what is the legal position of the Commonwealth. And sometimes that's a hard question because there are multiple really valid, legitimate interests of the Commonwealth that can be all present in the same case. And then in this work, I have in some ways worked very closely alongside the Supreme Judicial Court itself. Obviously in briefing and arguing cases to the court, and in advocating before the court which cases it should take on further and direct appellate review. In defending the Supreme Judicial Court's own decisions, when those decisions have frequently been challenged in the United States Supreme Court on questions of federal law. And then in serving on committees advising the court, particularly on their procedural rules and ways that those rules could be improved and clarified for the benefit of all who appear in front of our courts, whether represented or unrepresented. All the while, I have come to a greater and greater appreciation for the importance of state Supreme Courts in the fabric of our country as guardians of the rule of law and of the rights and that are declared in our state constitution and Declaration of Rights. While I have absolutely treasured my time at the Attorney General's office, getting to represent the public interest, I recognize that so long as I'm fortunate to be able to serving on the Supreme Judicial Court itself would provide an even more direct opportunity to advance the interests of justice. I would, if confirmed, bring to that role an absolute commitment to the rule of law and equal justice under law, a commitment to doing the hard work required not only of the court's caseload, but also of the justice's administrative responsibilities for the judiciary as a whole. And more personally, a commitment to doing the work as I have always sought to do my work, collaboratively and vigilantly conscious of the limits of my own knowledge and experience. So I am so incredibly humbled and grateful that the governor and the lieutenant governor saw fit to nominate me for this role, to place their confidence in me, to serve on the Supreme Judicial Court. And if confirmed, I would work as hard as I possibly could every single day to deserve their confidence. So with that, I would just welcome any questions that the members of the council have for me.
Thank you for your remarks, Attorney Dewar. It is now an opportunity for members of the Governor's Council to ask their questions, and we're going to start that portion of the program by recognizing Councilor Duff.
Thank you, Governor. Welcome. Good to see you. Thank you for all the time you afforded me, the many times we spoke. Your resume is stellar. absolutely no question. Your clerkships, it's almost beautiful to watch the building block of your resume, frankly, not just your education, but the work that you've done afterwards to attain the knowledge that you've attained. However, there is a concern out in the public, in the law world, that we have heard, and Counsel Fiera referred to it, that we don't know what your judicial temperament is. You have not sat on the bench at all. And yet here we are being asked to appoint you to the highest court in our state. Now, albeit one of my favorite justices, and frankly, one of my people that I care for very much, Margaret Marshall, was in the same position, right? She had never been a judge. And I find her to be brilliant, and her work was brilliant, and her temperament was brilliant. But it's a legitimate question that people have. I'm not the least bit concerned about your age, frankly, because your resume is years ahead of your age. So, but please address the issue of having not sat on the bench.
Thank you for the opportunity to address what I agree is a completely fair question. I absolutely think it is crucial that the Supreme Judicial Court have on it a diversity of experience, and particularly a diversity of experience with all of the courts in the Commonwealth, every single one of them. And I would bring, I think, to the court a lot of, I have not served as a judge, but I would bring a lot of experience with the different courts of the Commonwealth in a different way. I have worked, as I was discussing, alongside the Supreme Judicial Court really closely for the past 10 years, and also have worked a lot vis-a-vis the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's not to mention the work that I did earlier in my career, which I'm happy to talk more about at the trial level as well. So I fully recognize I'm not a judge, but I would hope that I would still bring a lot to the Supreme Judicial Court, and that the diversity of experience is reflected there.
So you have worked on, I would say, from reviewing your CV, every single level of the law that there really is. Is that not true?
That
Or
might
close?
be overstating it slightly.
Close.
I have had the privilege to work, everything from administrative hearings in front of an ALJ all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court, state court, federal court, civil cases, criminal cases. So I have been so fortunate to have a wide array of experiences. Yes.
You're very well-rounded. That is for sure. I frankly don't have a particular concern about this. I think your experience is exceptional. I'm almost like, how did you find her? I mean, it's tremendous. So, but I do think it's a legitimate question, and I'm glad that you addressed it. So let's get into the law. Heller. You and I talked a little bit about that. Since the Heller decision, in the way that the U.S. Supreme Court has looked at the Second Amendment, this is an issue I can see coming back to us in Massachusetts. I represent a lot of gun owners. Some are sportsmen, some are just people that like guns. So my constituents are concerned about this. How do you see that impacting Massachusetts? And what do you think about us? Our gun laws are terrific here, right? We're very lucky. We've, under the leadership actually of our now governor and former AG and our AG now, we have some of the best gun laws in the country, and therefore less fatalities, bad, accidents because of that. But it nonetheless, how do we deal with this here in Massachusetts? And will the federal government trump us at some point?
Thanks for the opportunity to address this issue, which frankly, I've had a lot of familiarity with my entire career. I was actually a law clerk at the U.S. Supreme Court when the Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment actually applies against the states via the 14th Amendment in the McDonald case. And obviously, in my work at the Attorney General's office, we spend a lot of our time defending the Commonwealth's public safety laws. I am, through all of that work, very familiar with the Supreme Court's precedent in this area. It is a federal constitutional right, and I would follow the precedent of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Thank you. Dobbs, the recent Dobbs decision has devastated women in this country. We don't have equal rights to begin with, and now we're being told we have no autonomy over our bodies. And the concern of women, not just in Massachusetts, but across the country, is that now they're starting to, it looks like they're inching into actually, birth control. And birth control is actually medicine that is not always used just to make sure you don't get pregnant. There are other medical reasons to be on it. So I'm not sure the male justices all really quite understand that, because they're not doctors. But how does this affect Massachusetts residents, and how do we keep bodily autonomy, including abortion, safe and legal here in Massachusetts with this current U.S. Supreme Court that we have?
Thank you for the question on another really important issue. I would, obviously, the Supreme Court has recently overturned Roe versus Wade in the Dobbs decision that you referenced. But in doing so, the court expressly said, this is now an issue for regulation by the states. And we live in a state, Massachusetts, that has our own laws that are extremely, some of the leading laws in the country, protecting patients' access to reproductive health care and protecting providers who provide that health care. We also have our own state constitution in the area of abortion. The Supreme Judicial Court, in past decisions over the past few decades, has actually held that our Constitution is even more protective of this right than the federal Constitution was under Roe. So here in Massachusetts, these rights are still very much protected under our state law.
Thank you. Equal marriage. If the U.S. Supreme Court overturns it, are we safe here? People like me and my wife, are we safe here? Do our equal in federal protections still hold here in Massachusetts?
Thank you for the opportunity to address a third really important issue that is one that is so close to my heart. My honorary godfathers next year are going to be celebrating 55 years together as a couple. And I was able to attend their wedding celebration because of the advances that our country has made in recognizing equality. My husband's brother and his husband, who live in Westfield, I got to attend their wedding, and they will be celebrating their 10th anniversary next year as well. And that is not going anywhere. States are the state Supreme Courts, and then state legislatures led the way in creating equality and leading our country toward the greater equality that we have today. So no matter what, we have our state laws, our state constitutions, and we still have federal constitutional protection. So
so you don't think if the U.S. Supreme Court overturns it, we'll lose our federal protections?
Well, we have co-equal state protections that exist and that will exist.
Okay. Death penalty. Is it cruel and unusual punishment?
On the death penalty, I would say my personal view, speaking personally, is that I'm opposed to the death penalty. I would, as if confirmed to the Supreme Judicial Court, follow our both legislative and constitutional law as I understood it as best I could. And beyond that, I couldn't comment.
Yeah, I liked very much the conversation we had about it must be at least a 35-year-old case in the Ninth Circuit, John Noonan. I'm a nerd, so I actually know about this, but it did cost him a U.S. Supreme Court seat. But his interpretation was really, quite brilliant, that he put that above his personal ambition. Okay, Lastly, I have a few minutes left, so let's just touch, and you and I talked about this in detail. Special people, special needs people. If someone comes into a courtroom and they have a physical disability, we know that. Our courts and our chiefs are working very hard at making our courtrooms more accessible because they're not right now. It's a challenge for us. And it was a great challenge that frankly, I think they did a tremendous job with, separately during the pandemic with Zoom. We were in a global pandemic and our courts met the challenge really tremendously. I mean, we may have had some bumps, but it was tremendous. But for special needs people, particularly people with developmental disabilities, sometimes they're easily recognizable and sometimes they're not. Do you have any experience? And I don't know that a case like this could come to the Supreme Court, but the case of Judge Noonan that I just referenced actually did very specifically have to do with a developmentally disabled person who was sentenced to death. So what's your experience in sentencing, not just the sentencing of folks like this, but their safety? If someone is found in contempt, will they be safe in even a holding cell? Will they be safe if they're sentenced to prison? Committing if you're special needs, it doesn't absolve you of committing the crime. But I strongly believe that we have a higher level of responsibility to make sure everybody in our system is safe. Would you address that?
Absolutely. And you've just touched on a number of really important issues relating to people with disabilities. These are, in terms of access to the courts, access to justice, and then what happens to them in the criminal justice system in particular. I actually, through my life, I have close family members who have developmental disabilities, and I, throughout my legal career, have taken a really big interest in the rights of people with disabilities to be full members of our society. I have handled anti-discrimination cases on behalf of people with disabilities, including, for example, someone who had a professional license that was being threatened because of her disability. Students, I've spent a lot of time defending, representing students with disabilities in getting the free and appropriate public education that they're entitled to under federal law. And then a lot of my work at the Attorney General's office has also in all the different ways that the Commonwealth's work and agencies relate to people with disabilities. I have been involved in some of those cases. So these are issues that are extremely close to my heart and I would be extremely passionate about, honestly, if I were confirmed to the Supreme Judicial Court.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm finished, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Councillor Duff. Next up is Councillor Kennedy, who again is joining us via Zoom. So Councillor Kennedy, we can see you and the nominee can see you as well.
Good morning again. I apologize for being on WebEx. I probably wouldn't be on at all if I didn't think it was such an important hearing that we're having today. One of the
Councillor Kennedy, would you mind speaking up just a little bit? We're going to try and
Sure.
increase the speaker here, but we're having something that never happens. We're having a hard time hearing you.
I've never been accused of speaking too softly in my entire career. Can you hear me now? How are we doing?
I think that's a little bit better. Yeah, but any ability you have to speak up would be welcome. Thank you.
Okay. As I just said, I apologize for being on WebEx. I was, got a positive result on a COVID test last night, and I certainly didn't want to infect anybody. But it's important that this is a very important appointment that's being made. I appreciate the time you spent in my office. You came in and saw me. We spent about an hour and a half together. We went over a lot of issues. Councilor Duff touched on some of those issues that I was going to touch on, which is I do believe in a litmus test for nominees. I think it's important that they not support the death penalty, and I respect your answer that you can't 100% say if it came before you that how you would rule, but I think it's pretty clear your personal views will affect that. That will affect your decisions, as it does everybody. We all bring that to the table. We tell jurors to bring that to the table. So I respect that. I respect your position with the women's rights and to make their own medical decisions. I want to touch on that a little more because one of the things that's happening right now, as I'm sure you're aware, is the Supreme Court of the United States has a case before it dealing with certain medications that are being mailed throughout the country. And the decision, I think it was out of Texas, I'm not sure, but basically a federal judge said, no, you can't mail it anywhere in the country, including Massachusetts. Now, I know the governor stockpiled 2 years worth of that medication to help women get access to that. How do you think that would impact the law in Massachusetts if they come down the other way? It seems to me the Supreme Court is going to go further and further along that path to prohibit women from having access to abortions all over the country.
I'm familiar with the case that you're mentioning, Councilor Kennedy, and thank you for raising the issue. It is certainly an extremely important case that is pending at the Supreme Court, and our office has joined together with other states in support of the federal government in that case, which is defending the longstanding approval of this abortion medication, which has existed for has been approved for a very long time, and so I'm very hopeful that that the ruling of the lower court will not stand, and notably the Supreme Court actually stayed that ruling pending its decision. So the medication remains available today as a result of that order of the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, I'm not as hopeful given the makeup of the Supreme Court right now. I'm glad you are. I'm not. And it's unfortunate. Anyway, I'm going to go back to, an issue that wasn't touched on is how do you feel about mandatory minimum sentencing in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts? Have you defended some of those cases as Solicitor General?
I'm giving that a moment's thought, but I do not believe I have been involved in any litigation defending mandatory minimums as such, to my knowledge at all. And again, speaking about my personal views is that judges should have the discretion to consider all relevant facts and circumstances about a criminal defendant and the criminal defendant's conduct and their history and their family history and all the other relevant circumstances that might be relevant in going into a sentence. So from a personal policy perspective, I do not particularly favor mandatory minimum sentences.
Well, I can tell you that I have spent some time recently in front of some very frustrated judges because they couldn't do anything other than mandatory sentences. And I've been frustrated because it's involved my clients, where it's clear, if you look at all the factors, they shouldn't necessarily be sentenced to jail. We give the discretion to prosecutors to make that decision. We take it away from judges because they're the charging authority. And I'm finding that it is getting exercised, that discretion by prosecutors, very rarely these days, less and less. And I've been doing this a long time. And I'm going to go back to the final area that has been touched on, and that is your age. You have to tell me why, and I asked this question in my office, why I'm going to vote for someone who was 3 years old when I started practicing law. So help me out with that. Who has never been a judge. I'm already voting for you, but answer the question anyway.
Well, I've been really, really busy in the 43 years since then. I totally appreciate the question, which is absolutely a fair one. To be completely candid,
You were younger than your daughters are now when I started.
Oh, pardon, sorry, I couldn't hear that, Councilor Kennedy.
You were younger than your daughters are now when I started practicing.
I thought about this question a lot myself in, considering whether to apply when this opportunity unexpectedly came up at this stage. And my conclusion was just that I thought that I wanted to serve and that I would bring to the court a lot of relevant experience that could help the court. And so I applied.
Why not 10 years from now?
That's an important question too. And I do think of myself as a really hardworking person who also maintains an open mind. And I think that I would at all times work to maintain that, and consciously maintaining. As I hopefully have an opportunity to serve for many years, to maintain an open mind and maintain the same level of hard work and dedication to my work that I have tried to always bring.
You know, being on the SJC is not a good job. It's a hard job. I spoke with Justice Lowy about that the other day, how it's 7 days a week, 24 hours a day almost. You're just working all the time. You're on committees that you referenced, that judges are working on committees. They're hearing cases. They're writing decisions. They're going to events. I've dragged some of the SJC judges to some Bar Association events. They're the face of the judiciary to the public. You become a little bit of a politician along the way, I think. Certainly the Chief Justice has to be. And, you know, how are you going to balance all that and not burn out? You could be on there 27 years.
Thanks for that question as well. All the items that you just mentioned about the important role of the justices, not only, you know, working so hard on the decisions that they write, but also with respect to both the judiciary as a whole and our legal community, being in some ways, you know, in the community as much as possible and visiting all different courts across the Commonwealth. That's actually work that the prospect of which is really energizing to me. I'm really excited about all that work.
You are
It is.
now. What about 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 15 years from now?
I think I will always have so much to learn. First of all, I have so much to learn initially, and then the world is changing constantly, and I will constantly have to be learning and studying. There's just no doubt about it.
I didn't ask you a lot of legal questions because I don't want to look dumb, because you're very, very smart. I just wanted to make a couple of comments and then I'm going to stop. Your family should be very, very proud of you. I know that your daughters and your husband and your mother that's there, and I'm sure if your father was around, he'd be very, very proud of you. It's obviously a huge deal. I told you when you were in your office, you told me you met with Counselor Iannella. You didn't get out of his office, and he was on the phone talking to me about what a great nominee you were. I told you that when you were here, and he was. You're very fortunate to have him as your counselor, and he's a huge, huge supporter from the minute he met you. I've become a supporter too. I'll be voting for you. I don't know when we're going to be voting on you yet, but I'll be voting for you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kennedy. Hope you're feeling well and recovered by Christmas. Next up is Councillor.
If I don't, my wife's going to kill me.
Thank you, Terry. Councillor DiPaolo.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Good morning.
Good morning.
First off, I want to thank my colleagues for bringing up important issues. It's certainly no surprise that Governor Healey and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll and their administration would put forward a nominee who understands the importance of bodily autonomy and protecting the rights of marginalized and minority groups. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate Councillor Kennedy's questions around criminal law. He's certainly one of the most respected criminal defense attorneys in the Commonwealth, and I listen very closely when he talks about that. But I want to talk about other things. It's been a pleasure to conduct diligence on you. From what I've read and heard, your reasoning and your writing are exemplary, things we look for. But let's jump into other issues. How would you describe the legacy of the Harvard study commissioned by the late Justice Gans?
Thank you very much for the question, which is a really important one. You mentioned the legacy of the study, which has been tremendous. And I would just say that I think that we shouldn't just look back on it as this amazing study that was done in the past, and that we should actually take it as almost a starting point, as wonderful as a study it is. And for anyone here who's not familiar with the study, this was a really deep examination of racial inequities and injustice in our justice system. And one of the difficulties was that as much as the aim of the study was to analyze the source of racial disparities. We simply did not have all of the data and the data points that would be helpful to fully understand those issues and then address them. And so I would hope that moving forward, that would be the starting point for more work in this area to be identifying with specificity and data, and then tracking. And then, as you mentioned in our conversation, which I appreciated, being able to see not only where are the problems, but where are we making progress, and whether measures that we've put into place have made progress. So that is something that I would be really focused on if confirmed to the SJC.
And in this role, you'd be an advocate to establish, along what you described, routines of data collection, so that we have this we can regularly check in with not just racial disparities, but other issues in our system? Would that be fair to say?
I'm absolutely in favor of having all the information that we need to make good choices. And sometimes that even involves changing the way certain things are done to make that information available.
And as you stated, and as most of the folks watching this would know, the Gantt study was mostly about racial disparities in sentencing. And we see racial disparities in other aspects of our criminal system, including even in folks who are sentenced to life without parole. And that brings us to brain development, because that's something that's pertinent to this issue right now in cases the SJC has looked at, and I have no doubt will continue to look at in the coming years. So in the Dychenko decision and others that followed from it, it was stated that the SJC looked at current scientific research on brain development and the myriad ways that development impacts the juvenile. So my first question, that is somewhat rhetorical, but can I presume, and you will be, as Councilor Kennedy stated, you will potentially be on the court for an awfully long time, and people are people, and we get set in our ways sometimes and convinced of things. Can I count, though, that you will, throughout your time on the court, be diligent in seeking the most current science where it applies to the cases before you?
Absolutely.
And if the brain science were to, let's speak in hypotheticals, although I'm very familiar with the science. Let's say that the science unequivocally demonstrates the neurophysiological differences between someone in their early 20s and someone with a fully mature brain. Would it follow that the decisions that have impacted 18 to 20-year-olds would therefore apply to folks in that later stage of development who are not yet fully developed?
Without specifically commenting on any matter that might indeed come before the SJC in the coming years, and before me if I were confirmed, I would absolutely be committed to diving really deep into the evidence that was brought to the court on all of these issues. I am not a neuroscientist, but my job as a judge would be to learn all of this entire area when a case like that came to the court. And I would be committed to doing that, whether it's in 2 years, 5 years, 20 years. And I fully recognize that the state of the science might be different in year 2 and year 20. And I would be committed at any point to understanding the arguments of counsel and the science behind those arguments.
And to state the obvious context, we're talking about the prefrontal cortex, where impulse control and the ability to plan, even susceptibility to peer pressure come in. If the science were to unambiguously demonstrate that childhood trauma exacerbates and further delays the development of a typical person, would it follow that childhood trauma would therefore need to be looked at when imposing certain sentences?
I think I already said when talking about criminal sentencing in particular, that I think that it's really important for judges to be able to take into account all of the relevant circumstances.
But should it be taken into account?
Well, I believe the sentencing guidelines, as I understand them, do acknowledge already the importance of taking into account where judges have discretion, past trauma that that may have occurred in a person's life. And I confess, sitting here today, I'm not familiar with all the science on that issue, but I am absolutely committed that if a case concerning the effect of trauma on a person's developmental state at a certain age came before the SJC, I would be absolutely committed to hearing all the arguments, diving deep into all the science, and doing, deciding the case as best I could.
But you'd agree potentially that if brain development is being looked at in other cases and a case comes about where it is relevant there, that understanding the impact of childhood trauma on the development would be a necessary step in the evaluation?
I would only, if confirmed to the court, be able to decide the cases before the court. But certainly I'm aware that in the world, this is an issue that is being raised, and I do expect that it would come before the court, and I would give it all due consideration.
Because of course, the sentencing guidelines you referenced, which I do appreciate the extent to which they account for mitigating factors, are not the judges are not mandated to follow them, correct? And so further guidance from the SJC in the future might impact that. On the issue of childhood trauma, so many of the children who are in our juvenile system and who, to use a horrible term, graduate to the adult criminal system, are actually in our state foster system. And I wonder if you think it's appropriate for judges to be visiting some of the places where the children are experiencing really ongoing trauma, even as we do our best to care for them. Do you think that it's important for judges to have the perspective of actually visiting some of these places?
I do.
And I'll ask a rhetorical question based on your application. Of course, I know the answer. You've had occasion to visit correctional facilities many times in your life. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And do you think it's important for all of our judiciary to be doing that across the board from district court on up?
I actually do, yes.
And is there a role for the SJC in encouraging or facilitating that to happen?
I would imagine so. I confess I'm not completely familiar with the different programs that I hope exist for and opportunities of different formal or informal kinds for members of the judiciary to visit correctional facilities, but I absolutely think that that would be a really important experience.
It seems to me, and of course, and I agree with you, because of course, we know about some of the challenges in DOC, for example. We know about some of the wonderful things that happen there. And I find it difficult to imagine a judge, especially in our lower courts, sitting and making decisions without all the context of the practical implications. And it's come up several times in this hearing, considering the practical implications of our decisions. I'm incredibly impressed with you. I'm grateful to the governor and her administration for putting you forward. And I have no further questions. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you, Councilor DiPaolo. Councilor Jacobs from District 8.
Hey. Oh, hang on. All right, that seems to be working. Hi, it's good to see you again. I want to start off by saying thank you for coming out to Western Mass to sit with me, and the amount of time that you spent with me. We had a really great and broad, diverse conversation that meandered all over the place, your background and many issues. And I don't want to repeat any of the ones that are already brought up prior, although some of them were on my list. So I have to reorganize myself to add something new, I think. I want to start from a place of just thinking about the SJC as a cohesive unit, right? With members who each bring their own unique voice and value to the team, so to speak, right? Think about it from that standpoint almost. And we did talk about this a little bit, but I'd like to hear from you just a little more about how you see your unique additive voice and value to the court. And as a secondary, not just in terms of opinion and area of practice and expertise, but also administratively focused, what potential committees you'd want to be a part of, or what kind of administrative work you're most looking forward to being able to be a part of.
Well, thank you very much for the question. I think I would bring a lot of different experiences of different kinds that would bear on my contributions to the court. I think I am, a mother of girls here today, and I am a daughter, and I have had a whole range of life experiences, some easier than others, that I think have brought, given me opportunities to cultivate a sense of empathy for others, which I don't know, maybe to some extent was innate, but certainly was heightened by some experiences that I've had over the years. More professionally, I think having had the opportunity to work as a civil rights lawyer, having had the opportunity to work at the Supreme Court and on a lot of Supreme Court related litigation, provides a federal perspective that's not always relevant, honestly, at the Supreme Judicial Court, but sometimes is. And I think I would bring that to the court. And I would bring to the court a spirit of collaboration, as I referenced in my opening remarks. And I would always endeavor to work so closely with my colleagues, because I strongly think that decisions are better when people have a chance to talk through the issues, and decisions of all kinds. I don't mean just judges' decisions, but everyone's decisions benefit from open-minded exchange of ideas among people who may be bringing different things to the discussion. And I really value that. I'm not a kind of person who's either defensive or not willing to hear other sides. To the contrary, I want to hear everyone's reasons why they might disagree with me. And I think that would be valuable as well.
And then what about from the standpoint of administratively, the focus you might bring, or the interests you have, or the legacy you'd like to see you fulfill over time?
Thank you. I'm sorry for forgetting the second part of your question. I would just mention two things. I'm sure that there's so much that I would get to be involved in if I were confirmed to the SJC. But from the perspective of not yet being there and just being an outsider to the court, there are a couple of areas that are of great interest to me. First, I did have this experience working on the rules committees, which I really, really have loved. It's so satisfying to have people identify ways in which our justice system is not ideal or is causing problems or is unjust, and then be able to change the rules and fix that problem in a professionally diverse group of people who all bring their own perspectives to those rules issues. And so I would love to continue working on rules related issues. The SJC has its own rules committee. And then I also would be really interested in working on issues of access to justice more broadly, beyond just the access to justice issues that are inherent in our rules.
I appreciate that. Thank you. Your age has been brought up numerous times, and I don't want to necessarily retread that territory either. But where I'm coming at it from is the standpoint of, I really appreciate the way that you operate currently. We've heard it from I've heard it in a conversation with you. You expressed your own, self-description, but also your witnesses have really just validated the collaboration, the empathy, the compassion, the willingness to challenge, but also be open-minded and kind of curious. And I think that's all wonderful and needed. But then I look at 27 years in a role, and as we age, sort of the calcifying that can happen. And so I just bring to you that concern of just, so you have mentioned things like self-awareness and consciously working to, but can you just articulate further the approach to maintaining that state of mind, even over what is actually a great deal of time in a role where I can easily see that fade and be replaced by, a more of a position of, I've been there, done there, I think about things. So can you articulate more about how you'll preserve that beautiful quality you have right now?
Thank you. Well, not to repeat myself, but one thing I didn't get a chance to say earlier is, if I were so fortunate to be confirmed by the council, one of the things about being a judge that I am most just like purely excited about, totally unmitigatedly excited about, is the prospect of having law clerks and the ability to every year have 2 new young people coming into my chambers and an opportunity to mentor them and pass along the, what I received as a law clerk, which was basically being taught how to write by my first judge, to whom I'm eternally grateful. But there's also, and my parents were both teachers, and they said the same thing, that, it keeps you young to have young people cycling through your life constantly. And the process of getting to be the mentor every year to new clerks who have to learn the ropes and getting to work with them. That's something that I think will every year be something new, and that that will keep me just on my toes as well.
I appreciate that. I like that answer, actually. So I did want to bring up an issue related, and many of the ones that I had on my list have already been addressed, which I appreciate my fellow council members for also giving time and thought to these issues. But I want to add a new one. And this one, actually, I just want to give it some data and contextualize it before getting to questions, but also personally contextualize it in that the area I want to talk about is the opioid crisis and growing body of data and science around it. But personally contextualize it in that Governor's Council is a role that very few people have heard of in the world, but it's interesting who has and why. And for me, out and about in the community, especially in the non-lawyer community, some of the most prevalent, the reasons why people have heard of it are because they have family members struggling with be it opioid or other addictions, and have had to come to court and avail themselves of court intervention to, save the lives of their family members. And it came up a lot. And so in many different ways. But I want to, so just in my own kind of deep dive into where we are right now, there's data available on mass.gov. First in 2015, that was showing that the opioid overdose, the fatal overdose death rate is 120 times higher for individuals with history of incarceration. And that was 2015. And then during the pandemic, another set of data collected that showed that there was a 3-fold increase. So think how big that already was. So a 3-fold increase in fatal overdose in the 3 months post-release compared to prior to the pandemic. So it just got even more exacerbated. What already is a staggering bit of data right there. And meanwhile, in 2018, there was a case that came before the SJC. I'm going to guess you're probably familiar with it, but just to give a quick, very concise description of it. The case was around whether judges can require individuals with substance use disorders to remain drug-free as a requirement of probation, which the SJC unanimously found that judges could require. But the science, the data, the understanding, the brain science, the health science around the opioid crisis continues to evolve. And the last additive thing I will just mention before asking you questions is that there is in 2023 right now, and I didn't see where it is in the process, but in the legislature, there's a bill requiring courts to prioritize treatment over penalties for people on probation who fail drug and alcohol tests. So that's currently a policy attempt. And like I said, I don't know where it is or what its likely outcome might be, but it just further articulates this body of thinking. And so first, I just wanted to ask you, do you agree that addiction is a public health issue?
I couldn't agree more.
Do you agree it requires treatment-based solutions?
Of course.
I'm not asking you to critique or challenge what the SJC has already weighed in on or might have before them, but I'd like to hear you speak on the issue in general terms.
So this is another really important issue. It's so important to the Commonwealth, to all the people of the Commonwealth. I doubt there are very many people in the Commonwealth who have not been touched in some way by this issue. I hope I'm not saying the wrong number, but I think it was something like 2,300 people in the Commonwealth died last year in our ongoing opioid epidemic. It's not going away. As you may know, the office where I've been privileged to work over the last 10 years has been working really hard on a lot of related issues. And I have worked on some of those cases, trying to hold to account not the people who are the victims of this epidemic, but some of the wrongdoers who were responsible for encouraging the absolutely reckless prescription of opioids in circumstances for bigger doses for longer periods of time, which have led directly to so many of these deaths. So it's an issue that I care a tremendous amount about. I don't know in what forms it will be coming to the Supreme Judicial Court, but it's something that I am extremely passionate about.
I appreciate that. The last thing, just to the conclusion I draw from the data I shared earlier, and I say this having visited all of Western Mass's jails, the Sheriff's Department's jails, and several of our prisons, and seen the health system that's in place. And there are Suboxone, and there's clinics and treatments in place to address what is a large proportion of those who are coming into these facilities struggling with addiction, and they're making an effort. But I think this data speaks to that prisons and jails are not a replacement for effective treatment. And so I just want to hear your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I'm aware that there is a whole body of research that has been done that I personally haven't been involved in myself, but I'm aware of analyses that are being done to look at the whole criminal justice system and identify the places where someone might be diverted to treatment from the very beginnings of something that might be called a case. It might not even be a quote unquote case yet. And I think that work is so incredibly important, and whatever I could do, if confirmed to the SJC as a justice to further that work, I would be in favor of it.
I appreciate that. I just want to conclude by saying it was an enormous pleasure to meet you and speak with you. I'm so impressed by, from your very young years through your education, through your career, your resume, just to echo some of the earlier comments, but your resume is amazing. Your experience is amazing. And just very, very pleased to have made your acquaintance.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Jacobs. Next up is Councilor Ferreira.
Thank you, Governor. First of all, I want to say thank you for the time that you spent with me the other night after work hours. I really appreciate it, and it was a great pleasure to get to know you and meet you. You certainly have huge shoes to fill. I'm a big Judge Cipher fan. I was excited not only that she got on the SJC, but that she lived in Bristol County. She was the first person in 100 years to get an appointment to the SJC. And I think she did a wonderful job. We're going to miss her. And I'm really disappointed that you don't live in my district. And now I'm going to have to listen to your fan, Councilor Iannella, pound his chest that not only do you live in his district, but you're his neighbor. But he is a big fan of yours as well. So, we all come from different walks of life, and I shared with you where I came from. First and foremost, the dad of 3 lovely ladies, and I appreciate you preserving their rights as women very much. I was a cop for 30 years. I was a police chief. I've been a lawyer. I was a prosecutor. And now I do some criminal defense, and I do some tort work. So I just come from a different background. And you and I had a lot of conversations about a lot of topics. I'm pretty sure we solved some world problems, you and I. But one of the things we talked about was your age, like everyone else. And I told you that I was the ripe young age of 42 when I was made a police chief, and people thought that was too young as well. And through my career, I made it a point of trying to promote not those who were older than me, but those who did the best job. And I always said that, what you did in the past is a good predictor, a good, I just lost the word, but
We know what you mean.
yeah. It's going to predict your future. So some of the things we talked about, involve some tort. And I didn't ask you this question the other night, but do you have any thoughts on tort reform or whether there should be statutory caps? You think that would be constitutional?
I would have to see the arguments, any kind of constitutional arguments about the constitutionality of any such cap that might be put into place. I do think it's really important for victims where someone had a duty to someone else and they caused harm to that person, that person be made whole, and that in appropriate cases, punitive damages be awarded. I strongly believe that. So without saying anything about any particular case, that's where I stand on that.
No, I appreciate that. You and I discussed when you did a 3-week trial with a crane collapse.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that very much. One of the things that, well, let me ask you about the child custody instance. One of the worst days of my life ever was when I got divorced and my 3 girls were young, very, very young. And we had to go to the GAL. And she came up and said, we should have shared physical custody. And I just became the police chief and I had a judge yelling at me saying that shared physical custody never works. And so in my 9 years on the council, I have tried to make it clear to every nominee to the probate court that I think shared physical custody should be the norm, given all other things. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I wanted to say one thing, if I could, in response to Mr. McCabe's thoughtful comments, which was one thing I noted he mentioned several times was that his perception was that the court never addressed the issues that he was raising, or that the court had not actually addressed the arguments. And I just want to say that one of the most important things to me as a judge, if I were confirmed to the SJC, would be to always, in every case, this kind of case and every kind of case, explaining the reasoning on all of the issues and making all the parties heard by acknowledging their arguments and acknowledging the strength of the points on all sides, and not making people feel like their arguments were not even heard.
Thank you. I got to tell you, shared physical custody does work. It worked for, my kid's entire life. And I have 3 beautiful, lovely, well-adjusted children. And I was fortunate enough to buy a house 2 houses away from the marital home. And I saw them every day. So it does work. I'm a big fan of that. Other things we talked about, public safety, police work. So I had a couple of things I wanted to raise with you publicly that we spoke about. Yesterday, I had lunch with some fellow police chiefs, former police chiefs, current police chiefs, and I'm a big fan of law enforcement. I think we all agree we all want great police officers, and we want them to follow the law. And in my experience, good police officers wanted great police officers, and they applauded when anyone got rid of someone who wasn't doing the job for whatever reason. And you and I talked about Commonwealth versus Long and the impact that some people think it's had on law enforcement's ability to do their jobs. Can you tell me what your thoughts are on that?
I honestly, to be honest, the really interesting and long conversation that we had, that was not a pun that was intended, sorry. The long conversation we had about Commonwealth versus Long was really, really interesting, and I really appreciated the discussion. It was fascinating to get to hear from someone who actually was a police chief, and I was so appreciated hearing about your experience, and so respected your story of how you led your department in your years as chief. I think that Commonwealth versus Long is a really recent decision, and I am not familiar with, for example, information or data that's been collected about the impact of Commonwealth versus Long. So I would be really interested to learn about that. I think that these issues are going to continue coming up at the SJC. I'm familiar with the fact that there's actually a case, follow-on case to Commonwealth versus Long being heard by the court right now. So that's something that I will be extremely interested in, as with every case, hearing from every side and every perspective, including every practical perspective. So thank you.
And I'm sure a lot of people here don't even know what Commonwealth versus Long is, right? So let me say, what my understanding is that if a police officer stops you and you have blatant violations of your motor vehicle, the defendant can raise the issue of saying, well, you really stopped me because of race. And then they can go back and look at the officer's track record for citations and how many stops they've made and things like that. Is that your understanding?
Yes.
Okay. So what came to light yesterday, well, not that I didn't know about it before, but one of the law enforcement guys I was with pulled out his phone and he said, look, this is what I make my officers do. I make them, I post it monthly, how many stops you had, how many were black, how many were white, how many were Asians. And they were a whole lot of zeros, a whole lot of officers not making one stop ever. So we have cops that used to make motor vehicle stops, used to fill out field identification cards. So if you did a Terry stop behind a building late at night, you would fill out a card so that that person would be on file of maybe being a perpetrator in the future. And then he showed me that list. And there were like 5 for the entire year, or there used to be like hundreds of them. So people aren't doing that anymore. So do you have any thoughts on where we strike the balance so that police officers are not afraid to do their jobs, not afraid to be identified as being something they're not?
I absolutely think that police officers perform an extraordinary service in all of our communities. They are the backbone of public safety in the Commonwealth and in every community, and they need to be able to do their jobs.
Are you familiar with POST?
The Post Commission?
Yes.
In the most general sense of, I know that it was created recently to be the, yes.
Okay. So I'm a big fan of having standards that people meet. But it's come to light recently where I hear from some of the police chiefs who had this reporting obligation. And depending on when you were supposed to report your officers who had things in their file and how you interpreted that, different police departments varied 180 degrees. Some people in small departments reported 12 people. Some of the huge city departments reported 2. And it was all about how it was interpretation of what you're supposed to report and whether it was removed from the officer's file. And the goalpost always changed according to some people. But the concern is now from some law enforcement people, just so you're aware of, is that, 25 years ago, a person called in sick when they weren't really sick. And the chief put a letter in their file, basically saying they lied. And now when they go to court, as you know, Brady and Giglio says, if you get proven liar, you can't testify. But not all departments reported equally. So I'm just bringing it back to your attention to see if you have any thoughts on that and how we rectify this.
You've raised a couple of really important issues there. I'm a really strong believer in, the Commonwealth carrying out its obligations under the cases you referenced, which require the Commonwealth, when it's prosecuting someone, to hand over to the defendant any exculpatory evidence that the prosecution has. I think that's incredibly important as part of our constitutional values and to try and increase the fairness of the criminal justice system. I've actually never heard about the concern that you're mentioning now, that there could be sort of differences across different jurisdictions in, what's actually being recorded to even be turned over. And without commenting on anything that, could come before the SJC, I think it's certainly troubling what you've raised.
Great. I don't hold your age against you in any iota. I think what you've done in 42 years is absolutely fascinating. I haven't met anyone who doesn't think you're a wonderful, wonderful person. That's very clear. Your experience is tremendous. You didn't even mention Harvard or Yale. You're so humble. I'm definitely going to vote for you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Devaney.
Thank you. Well, I have been crossing out all of the things I was going to say, being the last, about abortion, about minimum mandatory and gay marriages. But I first want to say, I am so impressed with your children. They are so well behaved. As a mother of 4 children, I can't even imagine when mine were that age, where would they be in this room? So and this is not the most exciting place for them to be. So I do want to mention that. First of all, I want to thank you for all the time you afforded me. It was such a pleasure to meet you. I think you're probably 1,005 that I have met in my 25 years, from parole board to judge. And I'm voting for the whole person, not coming in here and looking at a paper and seeing you for the first time. Your age has been brought up, but I've been here 25 years and I've seen lawyers going for a judgeship who didn't have the experience you've had. So I do want to note that. Now, there are many pro se litigants going into court now, more than ever. And I'm really concerned. I served on a commission on disability for 22 years. So I'm concerned about them and people with a language barrier. And I'm concerned about the pro se litigants because they don't have a lawyer to talk for them and to lower the requirements. And I want to just cite, in Judge Budd's hearing, there was a blind man, and he brought me to tears, and he told about how he was mistreated in court. And he testified, and he was denied his rights. And he was required to sign a negotiated agreement and to sign off saying he had read it and he understood it. So I'm really concerned about that. Now, in relationship to that, I want to know, do you believe that there is an obligation of the SJC, a role in these pro se litigants, and to address the violations of their rights of such judges and clerk magistrates?
Absolutely, I do. I'll go back to my experience as a law clerk a long time ago, which in where I was working on a lot of cases brought by pro se litigants, and it was of grave concern to me in those cases, just as a law clerk, because I would read every single one of their filings, and there were many stories in the filings that were extremely moving. And some of the litigants were really able to make real claims. Their papers made out real claims. And sometimes the lower courts had seen that, and sometimes the lower courts had just dismissed it. And I can't talk about the particulars specifically, but I did get to work on a case that had just been repeatedly dismissed, totally erroneously. The person's papers actually cited the governing Supreme Court precedent, and ultimately the court where I was working summarily reversed the lower court's decisions because that pro se litigant was right and had made out a proper claim. And I would bring the same regard for whomever is before the court if I were on the SJC. And not only that, that of course pertains to cases that actually make it to the SJC, which is of course only a tiny fraction of the cases across the judiciary in Massachusetts, but it would be really important to me to work to increase access to justice, either through appointment of counsel or easing the path as best we can for unrepresented litigants. And I would note in this regard the extraordinary strides that have been made by the appeals court in recent years, which is of course the appellate court that more of these cases end up in by the numbers. And they have engaged in some extraordinary technological innovations with partners to make it easier for pro se litigants to be able to file papers that can get them relief when needed and appropriate.
Well, there were many cases brought before the SJC in 2018, so you can take a look at that. But I am very concerned. And it's been covered, but about drugs, I just want to say that I go to the drug graduations. They're wonderful. That's the greatest program the state has presented. And these are regular people who are addicted. and they go through this program, and you sit there, and tears would come to your eyes to hear someone, maybe 60 years old, saying he's got through the program and he's clean. What could be better than that? So I do want to say there is, but we haven't won the war on drugs, and I'm not going to go into that. But the other thing is that when we spoke, I asked you, what was the proudest thing that you have done in your career?
Oh, thank you for bringing that up. I shared with you when we spoke that my application to the council has on it. There's a question on the application to the council that asks what honors have you received in your life, and I included on there something that I've never put on any job application in my life, but it's really meaningful to me, and it's really meaningful to me at this moment. When I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court of the United States, at the end of the year, there's a big celebration, and the staff of the Supreme Court, I think the people specifically from the publications unit, give an award for their view of the law clerk of the year. And when I was a Supreme Court law clerk, I was awarded the Law Clerk of the Year award, which is really meaningful to me. Through my whole career, I have always tried to treat everyone with respect. Everyone, everywhere where I've worked. It's so special to me that Jen was here for me today. And I'm still in touch with actually many of them. And if I were so fortunate to be confirmed to the Supreme Judicial Court, I would try to do exactly the same thing there and be respectful of and have regard for the work of every single person in the building. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to share that.
You've worked with many judges.
Excuse me?
You've worked with many judges. Is there one, and I don't want to, if you don't want to say the name, is there one that stands out that really impressed you and really has helped you along the way? And how would you emulate that judge?
Well, thank you for that question. I really loved and was so fortunate to work for all three judges for whom I worked, but only one of them married me and Alex, and one of my daughters is his namesake with her middle name. I absolutely treasure having had the opportunity to work with Judge Lewis H. Pollack of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, who sadly is no longer with us, although he was born in 1922, so he had a very good long life. He was an extraordinary person. Among his many accomplishments, he's credited with co-writing the briefs in Brown v. Board of Education. But what I would say about my experiences working with him, and I'm kind of repeating myself, but it's something that's really important to me. Judge Pollack always taught me that you always want your decisions to be understandable to the people for whom you're writing, for the litigants who are often in that job writing to us from prison. You want your decisions to be understandable, and you want people to feel that they were heard, that their arguments were heard and understood and addressed. And Judge Pollack, I'll just indulge in one short story, which is that he, at hearings, he would sometimes do an oral decision from the bench where he would just announce the decision. And you would have all the lawyers arrayed, and he would lay out the dispute. He spoke in just perfect paragraphs, and he would lay out the dispute, and he would say, the plaintiffs say, and then he would tell their arguments so eloquently, and you would see all the counsel at plaintiff's table, like starting to sit up really happily. And then he'd say, for their part, the defendants say, and then he would go through their arguments, frankly, usually better than they had themselves, right? Doing the best possible job. And they would start looking all cheerful. And then he would, give his decision. And that's the kind of jurist I would try to be, where everyone feels that the best part of their arguments were heard, no matter how it comes out.
Okay. Now you're going to be on the bench 2050, I believe. Am I right? If I got that right? Well, anyway, I just want to ask how you're going to keep up and to be fresh during those years?
I think I alluded to a few things. I think getting to be a teacher to law clerks will be a really exciting and fresh thing every year. I have already worked for 10 years at the Attorney General's office, which is, approaching half of 26 and a half. So, it doesn't seem so crazily long to me. The past 10 years have absolutely flown, and I've loved every minute of it. So, I'm honestly just really thrilled at the opportunity to be able to serve for a long time, and I feel confident of my ability to do so.
Well, I have to tell you, you have another honor because you are on the Belgium Waffle Hall of Fame at the Diner, and that goes with Judge Island, Justice Hines, Justice Budd, and so many. But I thank you for all the time that you gave me, and I wish you all good luck and success. And I do want to just address about police. I think it's the most difficult time for police to be serving. And I went to the wake and funeral the other day for Officer Tracy in Waltham. And it's just an example of a police officer going out the door who should be going home to his family. So I just want to mention that. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Last but certainly not least, Counselor Iannella.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
How are you doing?
Good, thanks. I didn't realize it was the afternoon.
First of all, it was a pleasure to meet with you last week. We took I took so much time. I didn't realize we were together for about an hour and a half, but I thoroughly enjoyed it. I felt I learned so much about you, your husband, your kids. It was really good. I really, really liked it. I liked it because, yeah, you look at your resume, yeah, you're an accomplished attorney, educational background. Yeah, we get it. You went to Harvard, Yale, but that's not the person. It was great to hear about you, the kids, and the family. You're my neighbor in Jamaica Plain, so that was really good. To me, the most important quality of any judge. Yeah, experience is important. Character is definitely important, but judicial temperament. That to me is the most important. And I'm going to ask you a question that one of my closest friends on the council used to ask every single week. He resigned from the council to be a clerk. He's the clerk of the Framingham District Court. But he asked this question, and I'm going to ask you, not your husband or the kids, okay? Do you have a temper?
I used to think that I had a kind of failure as a person, that I didn't really have a temper, and that sometimes there are situations that deserve anger, and I just was never really an angry person and didn't have an issue controlling my temper. And then I became a parent. And being a parent is it's like the most challenging job I've ever had. And I don't always, I sometimes feel that I fall short of the extraordinary standards set by my own parents who were, it was such a loving and supportive household, but also one where values were being inculcated and limits were being set. And they set a really high bar for me to live up to. And I will say in my professional life, I do not think I'm a person with a temper.
Well, that's good. Massachusetts is pretty unique. It's the only state, at least since I've been on here, I don't know, few years, that none of the judges have a temper. That's pretty good. That's pretty good. You mentioned you're excited you're going to have a law clerk or law clerks. I think we have some of the best Superior Court judges in the country. I really think they're hardworking and they're really good people. My understanding is they don't have law clerks. Your views on that?
My understanding is that they may share law clerks, like one law clerk for many of them. And I honestly marvel at the work that they do, and that the work they do with, frankly, from what I understand, not a lot of support in that regard. And so I think law clerks are invaluable because they're another set of eyes to dive into things, and Superior Court judges have so much coming at them all the time. So if I were a Superior Court judge, I would certainly want a law clerk. And whatever resources the Superior Court can have, I think would be valuable.
No, I agree. I think they need more help, but no, I do agree with you. Okay, yesterday, the Colorado State Supreme Court made a decision, I think it was based on the 14th Amendment, that former President Donald Trump was ineligible to be on the Republican primary ballot. Your views on that?
Without wanting to comment on any issue that certainly could come before the Supreme Judicial Court.
If I could just interrupt on that. With all due respect, I do not think that issue can come before the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, because I believe that there's only 9 states, okay, that the issue can come in front of. The deadline has passed in Massachusetts. Okay, in other words, if you want to object, you have to do it by a certain deadline. The Massachusetts Republican primary, or for that matter, the presidential primary, is March 4th. That deadline has passed. So don't hold me to this, but my understanding is it cannot, at least this year, come before the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. But putting that aside, what's your personal views? Are you someone that the court should make that decision, or the people should make that decision?
I would just say that I think while the legislature makes the laws pursuant to our Constitution that govern our elections and essentially are the backbone of the democratic system that we have, there is a really important role for state courts too in upholding our Constitution and the functioning of our democracy. And it would be one of the most gravest aspects of my job as a Supreme Judicial Court justice, if I were confirmed, to work to uphold those democratic values.
So I didn't quite get that answer. Are you saying that that's an issue the court should decide, whether someone is eligible, in this case, former President Trump? Do you think we're going to find out soon enough what the United States Supreme Court says? But most courts, I think there's been 8 so far. I think there's been 8, and I could be wrong on that too. 8 state Supreme Courts have said, no, he's been out. They haven't taken him off. Excuse me. They haven't taken him off the ballot. The only state to take him off in a 4-3 vote was Colorado. But you think that's a situation where the Mass Supreme Judicial Court should take up that issue? Or
I'm not honestly expressing any particular opinion on that issue in particular. I understand the decision came out last night. I have not even read it, so I can't possibly say honestly what I think of that particular decision. But I would just say that I have had the opportunity a little bit to work on election-related cases before the Supreme Judicial Court in my role at the Attorney General's office, and I would strongly say that the SJC does play an important role to some extent. While they don't make the law, they have to make sure that the law is followed, and I would take that responsibility really seriously.
I thank you. I don't think it's actually going to be an issue in Colorado anymore. What I read this morning is the Colorado Republican Party is eliminating the Colorado Republican presidential primary, and they're going to follow, this is just what I read in the paper, they're going to follow what happens in Iowa. It's going to be a caucus, so that issue will not even come about, whether it goes to the SJC or whether they take it or not. It looks like that issue is off the table because of the caucus. But I just want to say one thing. I mean, like I said, pleasure to meet you. You came across like, wow, when you left, I go, what a humble person. I mean, she's so nice. I mean, you're kind, you're caring, you're compassionate. And that to me is the most important qualities, that type of qualities. I think you're going to be a great addition to the court. I want to applaud Governor Healey and her staff, the legal counsel, the lieutenant governor. What a great pick. And I'm looking forward to voting for you when your name becomes in front of the council next week or the week after.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councilor Iannella. I believe that should conclude all of our questions, and just want to express gratitude both for our nominee for sharing so much of your experience, your character, your temperament with all of us as part of this process, and certainly to our counselors for your thoughtfulness, your due diligence, your inquiries. We look forward to the council's vote on this nomination in the very near future. And with that, I will go ahead and close out this afternoon's hearing.